It is a solemn honour and privilege to be here with Jenny in Jerusalem on this of all days. And I want to extend my sincere thanks to my friend Minister Chickley, who was a great friend of the Jewish community all around the world, but particularly in Australia. And I want to thank Minister Chickley, as I'm sure Rabbi Ullman would concur, for rushing to be amongst us so soon after the Bondi terrorist attacks. Can I also thank Prime Minister, my friend Benjamin Netanyahu. Can I thank him for his strength? Can I thank him for his leadership and from his unwavering commitment to the future and security of Israel, and for exercising what Israel has, which is its right, its justifiable and righteous right to defend itself. Can I also thank Rabbi Ullman? Can I thank you, Rabbi, for the strength of your faith, for your love, for your wisdom, and for your strength, despite the incredible personal loss that you have personally suffered. You have been able to be the voice, the one true voice, that has been able to draw so many Australians together, and you saw that and heard that on display here today. Thank you, Rabbi Ullman. Friends, following the end of the Second World War, Australia became a place of refuge for Holocaust survivors seeking a new and peaceful life. Those survivors became part of the broader Australian success story of post-war migration that produced what I believe has been the most successful immigration and multicultural nation on earth. Today, 1 in 2 Australians is either born overseas or has at least one parent who was. We have become a global standard bearer for cultural diversity and social cohesion. But the events of December 14, when 2 extreme Islamist terrorists, a father and his son, opened fire on a joyous and innocent gathering of Jews celebrating the first night of Hanukkah on Bondi Beach, Australia forfeited its claim to that story. The place to which Jewish people once fled has become a place many Jewish Australians now fear. This is a desecration. We are a broken-hearted nation, but for our Jewish community, we are a nation that has broken its promise to them. A promise of safety and freedom from persecution and fear. The late Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks warned that when anti-Semitism becomes violent, it represents the first and clearest sign of a civilization in crisis, and that the hate that begins with the Jews does not end with the Jews. After the first mass and world's worst mass terrorist attack on the Jewish community anywhere in the world since October 7, Australians must confront not only the security and intelligence failures exposed by these attacks, but the fragility of our own society that was shredded by the anti-Semitism that was unleashed in Australia after October 7, long before these murders were committed. According to the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, in the 2 years following the October 7 terrorist attacks in Israel, anti-Semitic incidents in Australia increased 5-fold, from an average of 343 over the previous decade each year to an average of 1,659 on average in 2024 and 2025. There were more incidents in those just 2 years than in the previous 11 years combined. Within 48 hours of October 7, pro-Palestinian protesters gathered at the Sydney Opera House chanting violent anti-Semitic slogans. Regular protests followed in Sydney and in Melbourne over the next 2 years, culminating in an estimated 100,000 people marching across our Sydney Harbour Bridge alongside those calling for globalised intifada, death to Israel Defence Forces, the elimination of the Jewish state from the river to the sea, and even the display of portraits of Iran's supreme leader. As Ayaan Hirsi Ali observed of similar protests in the UK, many participants were compassionate people seeking peace, but they chose to march side by side with those promoting hatred. During this period in Australia, Jewish professionals and artists and journalists were doxxed. Jewish businesses were targeted and forced to close. Homes were vandalised with violent slogans. Synagogues were attacked, including fire bombings where worshippers were inside. Jewish students were ostracised on campus, and academics intimidated into silence or conformity with a rigid or activist orthodoxy on Israel. At the policy level, the Albanese Labor government ended 75 years of bipartisan support for Israel by unilaterally recognising Palestinian statehood, a move praised by Hamas itself. In this environment, is it surprising that radicalised Islamists bent on violence convinced themselves their moment had arrived and that another Australian icon, Bondi Beach, should be the scene for their atrocity? Australia must now write a new chapter and honour those we mourn by confronting hard truths. This story must begin with disarming anti-Semitism and eliminating it, which was the primary weapon responsible for the December 14 attacks. Dr. Jordan Peterson has warned, like Rabbi Sachs, that the Jews are the eternal canary in the coal mine and that their persecution signals the collapse of a society. Anti-Semitism, he argues, is a byproduct of resentment, not reason, where malice replaces self-examination. On the progressive left, it is rooted in neo-Marxist identity frameworks that reclassify Jews from a historic minority to an oppressor class, with Israel used as a proxy for animus that already exists. As Peterson has said repeatedly, anti-Zionism functions psychologically as anti-Semitism with plausible deniability. It is also conveniently aligned with fashionable anti-US, anti-capitalist, globalist narratives, where Israel and the Jews are treated as a shopfront for US-led Western imperialism, as they call it. On the radical right, anti-Semitism takes conspiratorial and ethno-nationalist forms. Peterson condemns this outright as intellectually primitive, myth-based and historically catastrophic. It is, I believe, a pathetic projection of personal failure and insecurity. In all its forms, anti-Semitism flourishes where responsibility is replaced by grievance politics. Liberal societies depend on individual moral agency, and when failure is moralised as systemic injustice, liberal norms collapse. Individual responsibility is excused in the name of grievance, and institutions, universities, cultural bodies, media, even religious organisations that become infected with this culture become the seeding grounds for those who would wish to destroy the very liberal society they are supposed to nourish and protect. All of these anti-Semitic strains and influences exist in Australia and must be addressed by the Royal Commission into Anti-Semitism and the implementation of the recommendations of the Special Envoy for Anti-Semitism. However, given the specific involvement of radicalised extremist Islam in the Bondi terrorist attacks, Australia's response must pay explicit and specific attention to this issue. And I'm not just talking about immigration. The December 14 terrorists were homegrown. Their radicalisation did not take place in a madrasa in Southeast Asia or Afghanistan or an Iranian Halja, but in the suburbs of southwest Sydney. The father arrived decades ago from India on a student visa, and his son was born in Australia. Extremist Islamist anti-Semitism draws on all the threads identified by Peterson. It is not a religion but an ideology that weaponises faith for political ends. Within it, anti-Semitism is not incidental, it's core doctrine, it's the point. Selective religious references are fused with imported European conspiracy theories, recasting Jews as a hidden enemy responsible for global disorder. Israel is not treated as a state to debate, but as proof of the Jewish conspiracy that must be annihilated from the river to the sea. This pattern is consistent across movements such as Hamas and Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda and Daesh ISIS. Anti-Semitism becomes a tool to simplify grievance, deflect responsibility and justify violence. It is a mechanism of radicalisation, not a side effect. In a Western secular context, Rabbi Sachs argued that the answer to such anti-Semitism was not less religion, but better religion. He quoted Jonathan Swift, who said, "We have just enough religion to make us hate, but not enough to make us love." Sachs warned against the pathological dualism of extremist belief systems, where enemies are dehumanised and victimhood weaponised, paving the way for cruelty committed in the name of God. It would be comforting for us to believe that the perpetrators were simply bad and evil people. But the truth is far more disturbing. Good religion, Sachs argued, looks inward. It recognises that the struggle between good and evil, faith and fear, retribution and forgiveness is first and foremost an individual one, a human one that rages within each of us. Extremism externalises that struggle, and too often onto a real battlefield, as we saw on October 7 and December 14. For this reason, Sachs warned against the marginalisation of religion in Western democracies as an antidote and even as a trend. Such dualism is equally present in secular politics, believe me. The answer is not to blame faith, but to enlist faith and religion in our response. Good religion strengthens the art of association that de Tocqueville identified as the foundation of free societies. Properly grounded faith can anchor unity in humility and shared human frailty. Many Islamic states seem to have shown a better understanding of these issues than liberal Western democracies. Over the past decade, Gulf states such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain and Oman, as well as Egypt and Jordan even, have taken deliberate action to confront radical Islamic ideology. They have reasserted state authority over religious teaching, standardised sermons, licensed imams, and shut down informal or foreign-funded networks that acted as vectors for extremism. Political Islam is being curtailed there. The Muslim Brotherhood has been designated or treated as extremist. Funding channels have been disrupted. Charities re-regulated. Overseas ideological influence is sought to be constrained. Education curricula revised to remove anti-Semitism and sectarian involvement. The Emirates have gone further, building a formal counter-extreme architecture, including controls on education, and just last June, it excluded UK universities from scholarship recognition to prevent their students from being radicalised on UK campuses. While such state-centric measures would not always align with the principles of Western liberal democracies, in particular freedom of religion, there are certainly lessons to be learned. No freedom is absolute, and with such freedom always comes responsibility. In Western liberal societies, religious leaders have responsibilities not only to their own congregations, but to the wider society. Religious institutions must maintain sound governance to ensure proper teaching, accountability and discipline. Christian denominations in Australia learned this painfully through the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse. Accountability was rightly imposed on these institutions and reforms followed. While strong structures exist for most Christian and Jewish denominations, the governance of Islamic institutions, religious institutions in Australia is inadequate and requires urgent reform. Islamic leaders have a pastoral duty to protect their communities from radicalisation. And I believe most take this responsibility very seriously. However, stronger institutional frameworks would assist them, but it would also expose those who do not share their commitment. And it is time that the Islamic institutions in Australia adopted nationally consistent, self-regulated standards, including a recognised accreditation work for imams, a national register for public-facing roles, clear training and conduct requirements, and disciplinary authority for their governing councils. This requires a peak body that goes beyond representation to being given the authority and tools to enforce membership standards. This does not currently exist in Australia. Religious education should promote coexistence, civic responsibility and respect for Australia's pluralism, explicitly rejecting anti-Semitism, sectarianism and incitement. Teaching should be transparent with English translations available. Religious leaders must also clearly reject political Islam and transnational movements that weaponise faith for power rather than worship, and warn their faithful about such movements. Mosques and Islamic organisations should commit to safeguarding standards supported by independent complaints and review bodies with audit powers that extend to dangerous teaching and unhealthy influences, particularly amongst the young. Stronger governments also requires proper incorporation, capable boards, conflict of interest controls, transparent financial reporting, especially where overseas funding is involved. Specifically, Australia's Foreign Interest Transparency Scheme should be expanded to capture foreign funding, direction, training, doctrinal alignment or governance links with overseas religious authorities, currently limited only to where overt political lobbying occurs. This creates a structural blind spot for foreign-funded religious networks, clerics appointed, trained or paid by overseas bodies, long-term ideological or organisational alignment, short of formal lobbying. For the overwhelming majority of Australian Muslims and imams, these reforms should change little. They are not designed to police the mainstream, but to protect it from a potentially very dangerous and deadly fringe. Where similar weaknesses exist in other faiths, including my own, the same reforms and requirements should apply. And where institutional safeguards are absent for any such religious organisations, favourable tax treatment and public funding should not be granted. This is not the state dictating belief, but holding religious leaders accountable for what they preach and permit in their religious communities and requiring them to exercise that responsibility. It is the very least they should do. These reforms, led from within communities rather than imposed by government, would preserve freedom of religion, strengthen credible leadership, protect the vulnerable and rebuild trust. Some will seek to characterise my remarks as hostile to Australia's Islamic community and even multiculturalism itself, trolling out the usual accusations of Islamophobia. To the contrary, I am advocating reforms that I believe will help religious leaders in our Islamic community keep the wolves from their flock. To treat such issues as taboo serves only those who wish to keep these influences opaque and in the dark, where our two homegrown extreme Islamist terrorists were radicalised. After December 14, all options to combat anti-Semitism must be on the table in Australia without fear or favour. This includes Islam, how Islam is practised and governed in Australia. Thank you for your very kind attention. I'm Yusuf Al-Chai.